Please
door
have
closed
mercy.
with a sound
Don't
that
make me
didn't
go in
belong
there.
to wood.
Move!
It sounded like
You will
finality,
accept your punishment.
like the world itself had sealed behind me. The air
Crying
inside
won't
the room
save
was
you
thick,
now.
stale with sweat, tobacco, and the musk
Just
of
makes it
10
more
men who looked
entertaining.
at me as if I were a thing left out for them, not a person who could still breathe or feel. I remember the echo of the Baroness's heels fading down the corridor, the faint jingle of her keys, and then silence so deep I could hear my own heartbeat thudding in my ears. The walls were stone, cold and sweating from the night's humidity. The lantern that hung from the rafter burned low, casting long, crawling shadows across their faces. I saw their smirks before I saw their eyes. Men of her estate, drivers, guards, field overseers, all white, all used to power. I knew their faces from the fields, from the mornings when they cracked whips across our backs, from the nights when they stumbled into the quarters drunk on rum and permission. I could taste iron in my mouth where my lip had split from being dragged here. My wrists throbbed where the rope had bitten deep, and the back of my dress was torn so badly the fabric hung like a flag in surrender. But I was not surrendering. Not yet. The one they called Vance stepped forward first. He was tall, barrel-chested, the sort of man who mistook size for authority. "Baroness said you needed teachin'," he said, his grin a smear of yellow teeth. "We're good teachers, ain't we, boys?" The others laughed, a sound like boots scraping gravel, low and cruel. I didn't move. I stood in the flicker of the lantern and looked each one in the eye, the way my mother once told me never to do. "Don't ever meet their gaze," she used to whisper. "They don't see you as human when you do. It frightens them." But that was why I did it now. I wanted them to see the fear that wasn't there. Behind the door, I could still smell the Baroness's perfume, lavender and lye. She had leaned close before locking me in, her voice calm as a priest's prayer. "You looked at my guest as though you had the right to be seen," she said. "You'll learn tonight that you are invisible." Her words dripped into my ears like acid. But she was wrong. I wasn't invisible. Not anymore. My name is Adira. I was born beneath this roof, 26 summers ago, when the fields were still new and the Baroness was still young enough to smile in portraits. My mother, Thali, used to stitch her gowns, fingers pricked and bleeding so the lady could shimmer like ivory when she danced. My father, I never knew him. Some said he was a French sailor. Some said he was a ghost. All I knew was the look the Baroness gave my mother when she grew too beautiful, too noticeable. The same look she gave me today. I hadn't meant to draw the captain's eyes at the market. He was a guest of the house, newly arrived from Marseille, come to trade silk and salt. He asked the Baroness about sugar, and when I lifted the basket of limes onto his cart, he smiled. Just that, a smile. I kept my eyes down, but the Baroness saw. She always saw. By dusk, I was dragged from the kitchen, my hands bound, and the punishment was decided. Now I was here, in this room with 10 of her men, my body trembling from more than pain. They began to move in closer. The lantern flickered, throwing their shadows large against the wall. I stepped back until the cold stone pressed between my shoulder blades. I could feel every lash the Baroness had ever ordered burning beneath my skin, each one a ghostly scar whispering, "Remember." I remembered too much. Vance reached for me. His hand was rough, calloused from years of holding whips. I flinched, but not from fear. My body had already started counting windows, tools, doors. There was one shutter, nailed closed. A small workbench, scattered with rusted saws and jars. A bucket in the corner that stank of mildew. The air was thick with the smell of lamp oil. I had learned from watching my mother that every room has something sharp in it if you know where to look. Baroness said she wanted no marks. Another man muttered. Not on her face, at least. The laughter that followed was hollow, uneasy. Some of them weren't sure if they were supposed to enjoy this or simply obey. Obedience had its own hunger. I stared at the lantern. Its flame wavered whenever they moved, as though it were nervous too. I focused on that tiny fire because it was the only thing in the room that didn't belong to them. One of the younger men, barely older than me, cleared his throat. "Maybe we just keep her here till morning," he said, voice low. "She'll think it's worse than it is." Vance turned on him sharply. "You go soft now, boy. You'll join her next." The boy's mouth closed, His hands shook, and in that moment I saw something, a sliver of doubt. Not mercy, but discomfort. It meant something could still break. When Vance stepped forward again, I whispered, not to him, not to the others, but to the air itself. My mother used to murmur old words when fear came for her, soft syllables carried from somewhere far beyond this soil. I didn't know what they meant, but I knew how they felt. Like armor, like remembering. The words tasted like smoke and salt. My pulse steadied. "What's that?" Vance demanded. "You prayin'?" "Not to your God," I said. He slapped me. My head snapped sideways, stars bursting in my vision, but I kept my balance. The sting of his hand did something strange. It sharpened me, like the world had gone quiet except for the rhythm of my own breath. Somewhere beyond that door, the Baroness would be sipping her brandy, listening for the sounds she expected to hear. She'd built her power on silence, on the fear that made no one scream. But silence could break, too. I saw the jug of water near the wall. The men had already been drinking from it, passing it between themselves. One of them stumbled slightly, muttering about the heat. Laudanum, she used it often for her nerves. I had carried the bottles from her vanity enough times to recognize the oily residue that floated on top. My stomach tightened. The Baroness hadn't just wanted to punish me. She wanted to kill me, quietly, inside this room. That realization cut through me sharper than any whip. These men didn't know they were drinking poison meant for me. And suddenly, the room shifted. The danger wasn't just theirs, it was hers. She had locked us all in a slow-burning trap, one she could later call an accident. The floor creaked beneath my feet. The lantern hissed. Sweat trickled down my spine. I could hear my heart pounding again, steady, defiant. I took one step forward, then another. My voice came out low, even. "You think she'll open that door in the morning?" They stared, confused. "She told you to wait with me, but she never said she'd come back." A murmur rippled through them, uneasy. One of them coughed, swayed. The boy, the youngest, blinked at me, his eyes suddenly glassy. "What did she?" I didn't answer. I just looked at the lantern again. Its light was trembling now, dancing against the dark walls like something alive. For the first time that night, they looked afraid, and somewhere beyond the stone and shadows, I felt the Baroness's gaze, imagined it, heavy as iron, watching from her grand chambers, unaware that the lesson she'd planned for me had already begun to turn. Inside me, the fear was gone. What replaced it was something the Baroness would never understand. Something older, something waiting, something burning. I was born in a house that pretended to be beautiful. From the hilltop, it looked like lace carved in stone columns wrapped with vines, balconies laced with iron, windows tall enough to swallow the sky. But beauty is a liar. Beauty can hide screams behind silk curtains. Beauty can make cruelty look like culture. The Baroness's house was called La Maison Deveraux, and in Street Valenne, it was as famous as a church. Every merchant and officer who came through the port dined there, walked its marble halls, and praised the lady's charm. They never saw the basement rooms where people like me slept, or the fields behind the estate where men broke under the sun. They never smelled the blood in the washhouse, or heard the coughs from the fever huts. I was born on a night when thunder shook the sugar cane and lightning split the palm trees in half. My mother told me later that the midwife said I came into this world with my fists closed. "Like you were already fighting," she'd whisper. She used to laugh when she said it, though there was sadness behind her laughter. Her name was Thalie. She belonged to the house long before the Baroness became its mistress. My mother's hands were the kind that could turn rags into gowns. She knew fabrics like other people knew songs: silk, linen, lace, velvet. Her stitches held the Baroness together, even when the woman herself was falling apart. "Sew the outside neat," my mother would murmur, "even if the inside's full of rot." She wasn't talking about dresses. When the Baroness married Lord Antoine Deveraux, the city celebrated for 3 days. He was wealthy, old, and foolishly proud. She was 20, clever, and already cruel. I was a child then, hiding behind the servant's doorway as fireworks burst over the harbor, red light washing over her white gown. She smiled as though the world was hers. Maybe, For a time, it was. But Lord Antoine died only 3 years later, fever, they said, though whispers spread that his wife's medicine had been mixed too strong. After that, the Baroness ran the estate herself. No man could tell her what to do. She built her empire on sugar, slaves, and fear. I remember her voice most of all. Cold, measured, always a little amused. She never raised it. She didn't have to. When she spoke, overseers straightened, drivers held their whips still, and even the dogs went quiet. Once, I saw her dismiss a servant for coughing in her presence. "If you're ill," she said, "you contaminate the air I breathe." The woman was gone by morning. There was a story that she kept a list of every offense ever committed on her land, a ledger of names, crimes, and punishments. I saw it once by accident when cleaning her study. My mother snatched me away before I could read it. "That's the book of the damned," she hissed. "If she writes your name in it, you don't sleep another night under this roof." I grew up learning how to disappear. I learned which floors creaked, which doors opened silently, how to keep my eyes lowered but my mind awake. My mother taught me to listen to every whisper, every argument, every plan. "They think we're deaf when we're quiet," she'd say. "That's how we stay alive." Still, survival had a cost. When I was 13, the Baroness found a stain on one of her silk gowns, a drop of candle wax that refused to come out. My mother took the blame, though it wasn't hers. For that, she was whipped so badly she couldn't sew for months. I remember her lying on the floor of our room, her back wrapped in rags, her breath coming in shivers. "Promise me you'll never give her reason to notice you," she told me. "Promise me, Adira." I promised. I kept that promise for 13 years. But you cannot stay invisible forever in a house built on power. Eventually, someone sees you. When the Baroness grew older, she stopped attending her own parties. She preferred her garden endless roses, poisonous ones imported from Europe, that she tended like children. She'd walk through them at dusk, gloved hands brushing the petals. Sometimes, she'd call for me to follow her. She liked my silence, said it was soothing. I stood behind her as she spoke to the flowers as if they were listening. "You see, Adira," she said once, "everything must be pruned to stay obedient. If a single stem grows wild, it ruins the pattern." She looked back at me then, eyes pale as frost. "That is how I keep my world in order." That world was made of secrets. She held power over every official in Street Valenne, through debt, through scandal, through whispers she collected like jewels. Her estate wasn't just a home, it was a throne, and everyone in the city bowed to it, whether they knew it or not. The men in her service were extensions of her will. They did what she would not dirty her hands with. They beat, chained, silenced. They believed themselves righteous because she told them so. I learned their faces as a child and learned to hate them quietly as a woman. One of them, a driver named Benoit, used to whistle when he passed the women's quarters. Always the same tune, low and mocking. The Baroness once caught him doing it and laughed. "Boys will be boys," she said, "as long as they remember who owns them." She didn't mean us. She meant him. They were all her property too, though they pretended otherwise. The house never slept. Even in the deep hours of night, someone was always awake. Guards patrolling, servants polishing silver, dogs barking at ghosts, only they could see. I used to lie awake listening to the creaks in the ceiling above, the soft footsteps of the Baroness pacing her chambers. Some said she never truly rested, afraid of dreams. Others said her conscience wouldn't let her. I think she simply loved control too much to surrender it, even in sleep. I began sewing for her after my mother's hands grew too twisted from years of work. I was 15 when she first trusted me with lace. "Steady hands," she said, inspecting me like a craftsman would inspect a tool. "Not pretty, but useful." She smiled, and that smile chilled me more than any winter wind. She used to wear my stitching to the governor's galas. Each gown took weeks of blood and thread. When she twirled under candlelight, people gasped. They called her radiant, but I always saw the tiny red dots along the hems, the places where I'd bled onto the fabric and scrubbed it clean. Every gown she wore was stitched with pain. The older I grew, the more her eyes lingered, not with desire, but with possession. As if I were one of her roses, pruned, arranged, alive only because she allowed it. And then came that morning at the market. She had sent me to fetch silk ribbons and imported spices. The captain had smiled, a polite, passing gesture. But when the Baroness saw, the old jealousy she had once reserved for my mother ignited anew. By nightfall, the air around the house was electric with her rage. She called me into her parlor after dinner. The windows were open, but no breeze entered. She poured herself a glass of red wine and spoke slowly, her words measured like blades. "You've forgotten your place, Adira," she said. "Perhaps I've been too kind." I knelt on the rug, my heart steady, my mind blank. "No, madam." "Oh, you'll remember again," she said softly. Then she smiled a smile that promised a performance. "And when you do, this city will remember me." That was how it began, the plan that would burn her name into history. When she ordered the 10 men to gather, no one questioned her. Not the steward, not the guards, not the priest who blessed her household. Her word was law. Her cruelty was fashion. And I, her slave, was to be her lesson. But in that moment, as the men assembled outside the room, as the lanterns were lit and the key turned in the lock, I understood something my mother had never told me, that power built on fear is fragile. It only takes one spark to make the lace catch fire. And she had just handed me the match. The day of the market was hotter than any I could remember. Even before sunrise, the air in street, Valenne was heavy with the scent of salt, sweat, and sugar cane. By noon, the whole city shimmered like a mirage, the cobblestones slick beneath the hooves of horses and the boots of soldiers. I'd been sent into town before, usually to fetch thread, herbs, or tea leaves for the Baroness, but never alone. That morning, she told me I could manage without escort. I should have known then that her kindness was a snare. I remember adjusting the shawl around my shoulders, trying to hide the whip scars that the heat always made throb. The harbor bells were tolling. Gulls wheeled over the ships. The sound of merchants calling out prices mixed with the music of a violin being played by a child in the street. For a moment, I almost forgot where I was. The marketplace had its own rhythm, louder than fear, filled with voices from every corner of the colony. Africans, Creoles, Frenchmen, sailors from Havana, all jostling, shouting, living. I passed a stall selling oranges, the bright fruit, piled high like suns, and another where a woman roasted plantains over coals. The smoke curled into my hair and made me think of home, though I didn't know what home meant anymore. Maybe a place where no one called you property. Maybe nowhere on earth. The Baroness's list was folded in my hand. I was to buy silk ribbons, cinnamon, and a new silver clasp for her parasol. She said she wanted European things, because the governor's ball was coming, and she would not be shown up by the wives of merchants. "Tell them I'll only take what's imported," she'd said. Her lips painted the color of wine. "No imitations, Adira. No local rubbish." Even when I was away from her, I could feel her voice following me, coiled like a leash around my throat. I reached the stall of Monsieur Duret, the cloth seller. He knew who I was, everyone did. He never looked me in the eye, just asked, "What color does Madame desire?" in a tone that mixed pity and contempt. "Crimson and ivory," I said. He nodded and began cutting the fabric. That was when I noticed the stranger. He stood at the next stall, a man in a Navy officer's coat with silver buttons. His face was sunburned from sea travel, his hair tied back neatly. He was bargaining for sugar. When he turned, his eyes caught mine not by intention, but by the coincidence of two people looking up at once. It lasted a second, maybe less. But in that second, something shifted. It wasn't desire, not exactly. It was recognition, the kind that passes between two people who have lived under the same sky but different chains. His eyes widened slightly, as if surprised that I existed. Then he smiled. A small thing, a flicker, but it was enough. I lowered my gaze immediately, heart pounding. Around us, The market buzzed on, indifferent, but I knew, deep down, that the moment had already been seen by someone who would never forgive it. When I finished paying, I felt eyes on my back. Turning, slightly, I saw her carriage at the far end of the square. The Baroness herself sat inside, veiled against the sun. She hadn't told me she was coming to town. 2 of her guards stood nearby, pretending to watch the crowd, but I saw where their attention truly was on me. She lifted her gloved hand in the smallest of gestures. I froze. That was all she needed to let me know she had seen everything. The ride back to the estate felt endless. I walked behind the carriage as it rattled through the dusty road. Each turn of the wheels sounded like a warning drum. The sugarcane fields blurred past on either side, their green blades whispering secrets. I kept my head down, but the dread in my stomach grew heavier with each step. By the time we reached La Maison Deveraux, the sky had begun to darken. The first thunderclouds rolled in from the coast, heavy and purple. The air smelled of rain and tension. The Baroness dismissed the driver and disappeared into the house without a word. I followed the maid to the kitchen, my hands still shaking as I unpacked the silk and spices. "Did she speak to you?" the cook whispered. I shook my head. "Then pray she doesn't," the cook said. "Her silence is worse than her anger." But anger came anyway. At supper she called for wine. The entire dining hall was silent except for the soft clink of her spoon against the glass. I stood by the wall, as we always did, ready to serve. Her guests were few that night, only her cousin, a priest, and Captain Lucien Moret, the same man from the market. My breath caught. He didn't recognize me. Why would he? He looked comfortable at her table, flattered by her attention. She spoke to him in that measured voice that could slice through any man's pride. "You've met my servant, have you not?" she said suddenly. He blinked, confused. "I perhaps at the market." "She is clumsy," the Baroness interrupted, easily distracted. "A problem I intend to correct." Her smile never faltered. The priest chuckled politely, thinking it a jest, but her eyes never left mine. After dinner, she ordered me to her study. The moment I stepped inside, the air changed. The shutters were closed. Only one lamp burned. The Baroness poured herself more wine and didn't look at me. "Tell me, Adira," she said, "do you know what happens to slaves who forget their place?" I stayed silent. "They remind me of wildflowers," she continued, walking slowly around me. "Pretty, but foolish. They think sunlight belongs to them, so I pluck them before they spread their seeds." She stopped behind me. I could feel the warmth of her breath at my ear. "You looked at a man today, a white man, in public." I swallowed hard. He looked first. Her hand struck my cheek before I even saw it move. "You dare speak?" I fell to my knees, the taste of blood flooding my mouth. She leaned down, voice cold and soft. "Tomorrow night, you will understand obedience. I will show the city how a lesson is taught." I should have begged. That's what she wanted to see me crawl. But something inside me refused. The years of silence, the years of kneeling, the years of watching her destroy people, it all rose like a tide in my chest. I lifted my head and met her gaze. Her eyes narrowed. "There it is," she said. "That defiance, that curse your kind cannot hide." She turned away then, calling for her steward. "Lock her in the storehouse. Prepare 10 men. She will serve as example." The steward hesitated. "10, madame?" "10," she repeated, sipping her wine. "Let it be known that I am merciful. She will have company before she dies." They dragged me from the room before I could breathe. My feet barely touched the floor as they carried me down the hall, past the portraits of her ancestors staring down with painted eyes. The air was thick with the smell of wax and roses. I thought of my mother's warning, "Never let her notice you," and realized too late that I had done exactly that. They threw me into the small cell beneath the stairs for the night. I lay there listening to the rain begin outside, each drop like a drumbeat counting down to what awaited me. But even in that darkness, a strange calm settled over me. I had lived my entire life under her shadow. Tomorrow, one way or another, that shadow would end. I didn't yet know how. But I knew this: no woman could keep fire locked away forever. The night before they locked me away, the storm broke open over Street Valenne. Rain hammered the roof like hooves, wind screaming through the shutters as if the sea itself wanted to tear the city down. I sat in the dark of the cellar with my knees drawn to my chest, counting the seconds between thunder and lightning. Every flash painted the damp walls white, then left me blind again. Somewhere above, the Baroness's music box played faintly the tune she wound each night before bed. Even the storm bowed to her routine. By dawn, the air smelled of wet ash and lilacs. They came for me without a word. Two men in the Baroness's livery, faces hidden beneath oilcloth hoods to keep off the rain. One carried the key ring that clinked like distant bells. I remember the sound more than their hands. The sound meant decision. The sound meant fate. They marched me through the courtyard, mud sucking at my bare feet. Mist curled around the fountain where marble angels spat water into cracked basins. The house loomed ahead, columns streaked black from the storm. Windows shuttered, every line of it precise as a blade. And on the balcony above, she stood watching. The Baroness Deveraux, wrapped in white silk, her hair pinned high like a crown. Even from below I could see that her eyes were clear, rested. She had slept well. When I stumbled, one guard jerked me upright. She called down, "Do not bruise her face." Her voice floated through the damp air, calm, musical, obscene. Then she turned and disappeared inside. The door of the old storage house waited open ahead, its wood swollen from the rain, iron latch already rusted from years of disuse. They shoved me through and slammed it behind me. The lock turned with a heavy click. At first I could see almost nothing, only a dim amber light from a single lantern hanging by a hook. Then shapes began to form. Barrels, coils of rope, sacks of lime, the dull gleam of tools along the bench. And the men, 10 of them lounging like predators, half asleep, waiting for a signal. The room smelled of sweat, oil, and the bitter tang of spirits leaking from broken bottles. For a long moment, none of us moved. Rain dripped through a crack in the roof, tapping rhythmically into a puddle near my feet. I could hear my own breathing. I thought of my mother sewing by candlelight, her lips moving soundlessly in prayer, and I wondered if she had prayed enough for both of us. Then Vance, the barrel-chested overseer, who had whipped old Samuel to death 2 summers ago, stood and stretched. "Baroness says we keep her here till she learns," he said. His voice was bored, almost lazy. "Says we make sure she understands." Laughter answered him, low and cruel. They began to circle, not close enough to touch yet, but close enough that the air thickened between us. I felt their hunger, not for flesh but for proof of power. Men like them fed on permission. She had given them all they needed. I forced myself to breathe evenly. Panic was a chain, and I'd worn enough chains for one life. I looked past them to the workbench. A lantern, a bottle of clear liquid lamp oil, a jar labeled Chlore de Chaux, quicklime used to preserve hides, a small vial with residue clouding its glass. I didn't yet know what I meant to do, only that survival would require more than prayers. They taunted me, words slurred with rum. One mimed a bow, another spat near my feet. The youngest, barely older than I had been when my mother died, looked away, ashamed. That was when I saw the jug of water beside him. Its cork was loose. A single thread of laudanum could cloud a mind. I'd seen it drop the Baroness herself into hours of oblivion. My thoughts began to gather, slow but sharp. The unseen flame, my mother used to call it, the part of you that waits until the world thinks you're broken, then rises from the cracks. I felt it stirring now. Vance grabbed my wrist. His fingers dug into the bruises left by the rope. "We'll start with manners," he said. "You say, 'Yes, sir.'" I said nothing. He slapped me hard enough to split my lip. The taste of blood steadied me. "Yes, sir," I whispered, voice flat. He smiled, satisfied, mistaking quiet for surrender. They always did. When he turned to gloat at the others, I slipped free just enough to stumble backward toward the bench. "Water," I gasped. "Please, let me drink first." It was not begging, it was bait. The youngest, one hesitated, then tossed me the jug. The cork popped loose as it struck the floor. I caught it clumsily, letting my hand brush the vial of laudanum as I rose. No one noticed the faint splash as I tipped it in. "Thank you," I murmured, and raised the jug to my lips but did not drink. Instead, I passed it toward Vance. "Your turn, sir," he laughed. "Look at her. Boy's already learnin' her manners." He drank deep and passed it on. The others followed, one by one, like communion in a church of sin. I set the jug back near the puddle, praying the drug would work quickly. My hands trembled, but inside me that small, unseen flame grew steadier, brighter. Minutes passed. Their jokes grew louder, then slower. Sweat beaded on their brows. The youngest swayed on his feet. "Too hot in here," someone muttered. Another coughed, clutching his stomach. I moved to the corner, pretending weakness, while my eyes measured the distance to the lantern. Vance cursed. "What's wrong with you lot?" No one answered. The room began to tilt in my vision, not from dizziness, but from change. Power, that invisible line that had always run from them to me, shifted 1 inch my way. I could feel it. The youngest fell first, knees buckling as he crumpled beside the water jug. Then another slumped against the wall, drooling, mumbling nonsense. Panic rippled through the rest. Baroness said someone started, but his words broke into a groan. Vance staggered toward me, face purple with rage. "What did you do?" I backed toward the bench, my fingers closing around the lantern's handle. "Only what you were told to teach me," I said. My voice surprised even me steady, almost calm. He lunged. I swung the lantern. The glass shattered against his shoulder, oil spilling, flame licking upward in a sudden hiss. The quicklime sacks caught first, then the wooden crates, then the air itself seemed to burn. The roar swallowed their shouts. I ran. Smoke clawed at my lungs as I groped for the back wall, where an old coal chute angled down toward the yard. My hands found the latch, rusted but yielding. I squeezed through, scraping skin, tearing cloth. Behind me, the fire howled. It was no longer unseen. When I tumbled into the wet grass outside, the night was red. Rain fell in sheets, hissing as it struck the flames pouring from the windows. For a moment I lay there, gasping, half-blinded, unable to tell if the screams I heard were theirs or my own memory. Then I crawled to my knees and looked back. The storage house was a torch. Sparks leapt into the sky like stars breaking free. I could smell burning hair, wet wood, vengeance. Somewhere above the roar, the Baroness's voice called for servants, for water, for order. She didn't yet know what had begun, that the lesson she designed for me would spread far beyond her walls. I staggered toward the cane fields, every step tearing open new pain. My dress clung to my skin, soaked with rain and blood. The wind carried embers into the fields, setting the dry stalks alight. Flames raced through them in long orange lines. The plantation itself seemed to be breathing fire. I didn't run. I walked until I reached the far fence and turned to watch. The heat on my face was almost gentle compared to the years behind me. The unseen flame had finally shown itself, and nothing, no whip, no chain, no Baroness could hide it again. I remember no sound at first, only a deep humming in my skull, as if the world had swallowed its own voice. The rain had turned to steam where it met the blaze, and every breath tasted of smoke and iron. My hands were black with soot. My arms streaked red where splinters of glass had cut me crawling through the chute. I kept moving because stopping meant feeling, and feeling meant breaking. The night had turned the color of blood. Behind me the storehouse screamed a high, living sound made of wood twisting, barrels bursting, men howling. It should have frightened me, but it didn't. After a lifetime of hearing others suffer, the noise of my tormentors burning was almost holy. I staggered through the cane rows until the heat softened and the rain returned, a curtain between me and what I'd done. Then I dropped to my knees and pressed my forehead into the mud. For a long time I stayed like that, half praying, half trying to understand what freedom had just cost. The voices inside the fire grew fewer until there were none. The plantation fell into an eerie stillness, no dogs, no shouting, no whip cracks. Only the slow crackle of ruin. I wanted to believe it was over, that the Baroness would run and never return, that her house would collapse with the rest. But the silence after violence is never peace. It is the pause before discovery. I rose, trembling. My feet left prints mixed with ash as I made for the servant quarters. The path curved past the well, where rainwater overflowed, black and gleaming. I could see the reflection of flames dancing on its surface, as if the fire lived in the depths too. Every instinct screamed to flee, but another voice, the one that had grown inside me since childhood, whispered that running meant leaving everyone else behind. Through the blur of smoke, I saw the outlines of the great house. Light flickered behind the parlor windows. The Baroness had not fled. Of course she hadn't. Women like her didn't run, they commanded the world to kneel, even when the world was burning. I imagined her standing in that velvet room, calling for guards who would never answer, cursing servants who were already ghosts. Lightning split the sky. For an instant I saw the fields in full, a sea of cane bent double under wind and rain. Somewhere out there, other slaves were waking, confused by the smell of smoke and the glow on the horizon. I had started something I could not end alone. I moved carefully between the quarters, whispering names. Cora, Maisie, Samuel. No one answered at first. Then a door creaked and a face appeared. Cora, eyes wide, hair wrapped hastily in cloth. "Lord save us, Adira," she breathed. "What have you done?" "Something that can't be undone," I said. "Gather them." Quietly. She disappeared without another word. When she returned, 5 others followed. Maisie, small and shaking. Samuel, his beard gray and his spine bent. Isaac, the field hand with arms like carved oak. And 2 women I barely knew. Their eyes searched mine for answers I didn't have. "The storehouse?" Samuel asked. "Gone," I said. He nodded once, understanding more than the others could. "Then we've got little time. The mistress'll send riders before sunrise." Maisie whimpered. "They'll kill us all." "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe not if we move now." My voice surprised me, steady, commanding, not the voice of someone who had spent a lifetime obeying. "Samuel, you said once there was a place north people who help." He hesitated, then nodded. "A Quaker farm beyond the river. 40 miles. Dangerous road. Dangerous or not, it's the only road we've got." Lightning flashed again, followed by thunder that rolled across the valley like a drum of war. We packed quickly bread, dried corn, a flask of rum from the kitchen, knives scavenged from the overseer's shed. I found a shawl to hide the torn back of my dress. Every movement felt dreamlike, as if my body knew what to do while my mind watched from far away. Before we left, I crept once more toward the mansion. I don't know why, perhaps to see the monster one last time, perhaps to make sure the fire reached her heart. Through the open doorway I saw her standing at the foot of the grand staircase, white gown spattered with soot, hair falling loose. She was shouting orders at men who no longer existed. Her eyes were wild, reflecting the firelight like mirrors. When she saw me through the smoke, she froze. For a moment we stared at each other across that burning threshold, mistress and slave, creator and consequence. The rain hissed on the flames between us. I could have run. Instead, I stepped forward until the heat seared my skin. She lifted her chin, defiant even as her world collapsed. "You think this makes you free?" she shouted. "You'll die before dawn." "Maybe," I said, voice raw. "But you'll die knowing who set you on fire." Her face twisted, something between hatred and disbelief. Then the ceiling above her groaned. A beam fell, sparks showering the marble. She screamed, and I turned away. I didn't look back again. When I reached the quarters, the others were ready. We slipped into the fields, following Samuel's lead through rows of wet cane. The rain masked our footprints, but the glow behind us lit the sky like sunrise. Every few steps, someone glanced over a shoulder, expecting to see riders. Only thunder followed. Hours past that. The storm easing to drizzle. My wounds burned. Fever prickled beneath my skin. Still, I pressed on. Each step was a prayer, each breath a rebellion. Somewhere ahead lay the river, the thin line between the Baroness's domain and the uncertain world beyond. When dawn finally came, the city below the hill was smothered in smoke. From a ridge we saw the full ruin, the mansion a black skeleton against a red sky, flames devouring the sugar storehouses, Fire spreading toward the harbor. Wind carried sparks across the rooftops of street Valenne. People were shouting, running, forming chains to pass buckets. But the fire leapt faster than they could move. The Baroness had wanted a spectacle. She had one. Her punishment, meant to restore order, had undone the entire city. Samuel crossed himself. "The Lord works through strange hands," he said quietly. I stared at the burning estate and felt no holiness, only the weight of what could not be taken back. 10 men were dead because of me, maybe more by morning. Yet for the first time since I could remember, I felt my chest fill without pain. The air, even thick with ash, was mine to breathe. We reached the river by mid-morning. The current was high from the storm, brown and roaring. On the far bank lay forest freedom wrapped in uncertainty. Isaac cut branches for makeshift poles. Samuel found a half-sunk raft used for hauling cane. One by one we climbed aboard. The river seized us like a living thing. Water slapped my face. Cold rushed through every wound. When the current threw us against a fallen tree, we held tight and pushed off again. Coughing, shivering, alive. By the time we reached the opposite shore, the sun had burned through the smoke. Steam rose from our clothes. Behind us, Street Valenne was a scar on the horizon, black and smoking. The Baroness's house was gone, her power with it, but I knew she still lived. Monsters don't die easily. We built a small fire in the woods to dry ourselves. The smoke curled gently upward, harmless compared to the inferno we'd left behind. I looked at my hands, raw and trembling, and realized they no longer shook from fear but from exhaustion. Cora pressed a damp cloth to my back. "You did what we all dreamed of," she whispered. "No," I said, staring into the tiny flames. "I did what I had to. Dreaming is still ahead." The forest around us was silent except for rain dripping from leaves. After so many years of noise orders, whips, prayers, the quiet felt strange, heavy, but clean. The silence before the fire had ended. Another kind had begun, one that belonged to us. Dawn came shrouded in smoke. Even the roosters were silent, choking on the ash that drifted through the cane fields. Inside the ruins of La Maison Deveraux, the Baroness woke to the hiss of rain, striking hot stone. She had fallen asleep in the parlor chair, still wearing her pearl earrings, a brandy glass overturned beside her. For a moment she thought the orange glow on the wall was sunrise. Then the heat kissed her face, and the world snapped into horror. I did not see her wake, but I have imagined it every day since. The way her eyes would have widened, how her hand must have reached for the bell pull that no longer worked because the servants were gone. I imagine her white gown clinging with soot, her polished shoes sinking into wet ash as she stumbled to the window. Outside, her empire burned the storehouses, the stables, the cane rows that had fed her fortune. Smoke rose like a curse she had written herself. From where we hid in the forest edge, we could see the mansion's reflection trembling in the flooded fields. Each gust of wind tore another piece of roof away. The bell tower collapsed first, its bronze tongue ringing once before silence swallowed it. "She'll never rebuild," Samuel whispered beside me. "Not after this." But I wasn't sure. People like the Baroness didn't die from loss. They lived to avenge it. By mid-morning, riders appeared, city guards summoned from Street Valenne. Their blue coats looked gray in the smoke. They shouted orders, formed bucket lines, and dragged survivors from the wreckage. The Baroness stood among them, drenched and trembling, her face streaked with soot but unburned. Even ruined, she commanded attention. The men bowed as they passed. She pointed toward the quarters, toward the road that led north. "Find them," she said. Her voice carried even over the wind. "Bring them to me." I felt Cora's hand clutch mine. "She lives." "Yes," I said, "and she'll come for us." We retreated deeper into the forest. The others wanted to keep moving, but my body refused another step. Fever licked behind my eyes. Every breath came raw. Samuel ordered a halt near an abandoned hunting cabin. We crouched inside, listening to the distant chaos, hooves pounding, men shouting, wood collapsing. Through a crack in the wall, I saw smoke curling upward like a column to heaven. Somewhere inside that column was the Baroness's scream. In the city below, panic spread faster than fire. The docks closed as embers blew across the harbor. Merchants fled with their ledgers. Families packed wagons. Rumors tangled like vines. Some said lightning struck the sugar sheds, others that slaves had revolted, others still that witchcraft had been performed on the hill. The name Deveraux passed from mouth to mouth like a prayer and a warning. By noon, the governor himself arrived to inspect the ruins. His carriage wheels sank in the mud. Witnesses later said he found the Baroness standing barefoot at the foot of the staircase that no longer led anywhere, her hands black to the wrists. "This is your doing?" he demanded. She lifted her head slowly. "My mercy was repaid with betrayal," she said. "A creature I owned unleashed this." And then, with sudden fury, "Find her. Find the woman called Adira." Those words rolled through the colony like thunder. I became a ghost hunted by name. That afternoon, as we lay hidden in the cabin, we heard the dogs. Their baying cut through the rain, low first, then sharp. Isaac cursed under his breath. "They've got our scent." Samuel looked at me. "You started the fire," he said, not accusing, only stating truth. "You'll have to lead the way out." My fever blurred the edges of the world, but instinct guided me. I remembered the old paths my mother had taken to gather herbs, narrow trails that twisted through mangrove and reed. "This way," I whispered, and we slipped out the back into a maze of green and water. The mud sucked at our ankles, leeches clung, branches tore at our clothes. Behind us, the dogs grew louder. At the riverbank, the rain returned, heavy and cold. We waded waist-deep into the current, letting it carry our scent downstream. The dogs reached the bank minutes later, barking in confusion. A shot cracked through the air. A bullet split the water, beside me, sending a plume skyward. Maisie screamed. Samuel clamped a hand over her mouth. "Quiet, girl, quiet." We pressed on until the trees swallowed us again. When the sound of pursuit faded, I sank onto the mud. My body shook uncontrollably. Every muscle burned. My back felt on fire again, though the wounds were weeks old. Cora knelt beside me, whispering fragments of the old prayers, half African, half French, the language of survival. That night we built no fire. The forest smelled of rain and rot. I dreamed of the Baroness walking barefoot through her ruined house, calling my name in a voice sweet as honey. "Come back, Adira," she crooned. "I only want to talk." When I woke, the dream clung to me like cobweb. 2 days passed. We traveled by night, hiding by day. My fever broke and returned like tides. The others grew restless, frightened by silence. On the 3rd morning we heard church bells from faraway Street Valenne calling for aid. The city was still, burning. Even the governor's mansion had caught when sparks carried on the wind. What began as one woman's punishment had turned into an inferno that devoured half a city. Word of miracles followed close behind. In the marketplaces that survived, people swore they saw angels in the smoke. Others claimed the Baroness had summoned the devil. The priests preached repentance. The merchants blamed rebellion. The enslaved whispered that justice had finally walked the earth in bare feet and torn linen. My name spread without my telling it. They called me La Brûlante, the burning one. Meanwhile, the Baroness gathered what power she could. From traders, she bought new horses. From the church, forgiveness. From the governor, sympathy. A savage uprising, she declared publicly. A contagion of insolence. She offered gold for my capture. Alive, she said, if possible. The irony struck me even then. She who had owned everything, now owned only her hatred. I had taken her wealth, her servants, her reputation. Yet she still had the one weapon she'd always wielded, best fear. Posters went up promising freedom and coin to any slave who betrayed another. Hunters prowled the countryside. We saw their torches at night, bobbing like fireflies along the horizon. On the 5th day we reached higher ground. From there we could see the city's ruins clearly. Smoke still drifted, but rainbows shimmered through the mist. The sight made Samuel drop to his knees. "Look what you did, child," he murmured, awe and sorrow mixing in his voice. "You changed the map itself." I didn't answer. The wind carried the faintest echo of bells, mourning or celebration. I couldn't tell. My heart felt heavy as stone and light as air at once. When night fell, I carved a small cross from cane stalk and planted it in the mud. For the ones who burned, I whispered, even the guilty. The others stood silent behind me. There was no more room for triumph, only for endurance. Somewhere, the Baroness was awake too, her mourning stretching into endless ash-colored days, plotting my capture, rebuilding her illusion of control. But she could never scrub the smoke from her hands, nor stop the stories already blooming in every tavern and port. She had tried to bury me in fire, and instead set the world alight. The sun rose red the next day. I took it as a sign. We turned our backs to the city and began the long walk north. Each step felt like stealing something back from her, the ground, the air, the right to exist. And though the dogs still barked in my dreams, I kept moving. Morning belonged to no mistress now. The first thing I remember about those days after the fire was the noise. Not the roar of the flames that had ended, but the noise that came after. When the living tried to name what they had seen, Street Valenne became a mouthful of rumors. Every street carried a different version of the story. A woman set the blaze with her dying breath. A ghost rose from the slave quarters. A curse had come over the harbor. The truth had burned with the house, and what rose from its ashes was louder than any truth could ever be. From the marsh where we hid, we could see the city trembling. Ships lay stranded at the docks, their sails gray with soot. Soldiers patrolled the alleys, muskets slung over their shoulders, faces masked with rags against the smoke. Church bells rang morning and evening, not for prayer but for warning: stay indoors, repent, beware. The wind carried the sound inland, so that even in the forest we heard it, that constant tolling of guilt. By the second week, the markets were empty. The sugar trade had collapsed, the cane fields ruined. Men who had grown rich off the backs of the enslaved now cursed the same fields they once called golden, and behind every curse was my name. Adira, they whispered. The burning woman. They said I had consorted with demons, that my eyes glowed red in the dark, that I had walked out of the fire untouched. Lies travel faster than light, and the Baroness fed each one. She had survived. Barely. The papers printed her testimony in bold French script. My estate was destroyed by an uprising led by a slave woman of unnatural cunning. She called herself victim, martyr, heroine. The governor awarded her an official commendation for restoring order. But order had fled the colony like smoke. The militia she organized to hunt me did not protect the city. It terrorized it. They dragged people from their homes at night, demanding to know if they had seen me. They burned the quarters of the freedmen near the wharf, claiming I hid among them. Whole families vanished into the marshes, never to return. I heard these things from travelers along the road, north runaway sailors, traders on horseback, women carrying baskets of salt. Each had a story, and in every story, my legend grew. Some said I had wings of fire. Some said I had drowned myself in the river and haunted the reeds. But none said I was still walking, still breathing. That kept us safe. For days we moved through the countryside, keeping to the narrow animal trails. The air smelled of burnt molasses. Sometimes at night we saw torches far behind, the Baroness's patrols scouring the plains. Once, we hid beneath a fallen tree while riders passed so close I could hear the jingle of their bridles. They were singing a hymn, the same one the Baroness used to play on her harpsichord. Hearing it there, amid mud and fear, chilled me worse than the wind. We lived on roots and rainwater. Maisie grew feverish. Samuel's cough worsened. Every dawn he said he would slow us down, that we should leave him, and every dusk we refused. If I die, he rasped, bury me standing. I want to face the north. That was how deep his longing ran for a freedom he had never seen but believed in like a second sunrise. One evening, when the clouds finally cleared, we reached a ridge overlooking the harbor. From that height the city looked small, fragile, half drowned in its own smoke. I could see the governor's mansion, the cathedral, and at the far edge, the black skeleton of La Maison Deveraux. Flames no longer burned, but the air above it shimmered as if the ground still breathed heat. I realized then that I had done something larger than vengeance. I had changed the shape of power. The city no longer feared the Baroness. It feared what she had created. Cora sat beside me, her voice barely a whisper. "They'll make a monster out of you." "Let them," I said. "Monsters live longer than slaves." We descended the ridge and crossed into low country, where the soil turned red and the trees hung heavy with moss. Travelers we met there spoke of rebellion in other plantations, men refusing to work, women setting fire to mills. The soldiers couldn't be everywhere at once. Some said the Baroness herself had fled to the capital to plead for more troops. Others swore she was hiding in the ruins, talking to ghosts. I didn't know which version I wanted to be true. That night, thunder rolled again, and with it came memories I'd tried to bury. The faces of the 10 men, the smell of burning flesh, the silence afterward. I told myself they deserved it, that every lash they'd ever laid found them in the end. Still, when I closed my eyes, I saw their hands reaching through flame. Freedom is never clean. It leaves ash under the nails. We traveled north another week. The land rose into rocky hills. The cane gave way to pine. The stars grew sharper in the cold air. Samuel said we were close. "Another day, maybe 2. The Quakers'll take us in." His voice carried that quiet faith that made the others believe. But the dogs found us before dawn. Their barking shattered the stillness. In seconds, the forest filled with shouts, gunfire, snapping twigs. "Run!" Samuel cried. We scattered. I grabbed Maisie's hand and plunged through the undergrowth, thorns ripping my skin. Bullets hissed past like insects. Behind us, a man screamed a gunshot, then silence. "Samuel." I didn't look back. We reached a stream and waded upstream, letting the water hide our trail. The current bit at our legs. Maisie sobbed, whispering prayers between breaths. When the noise of pursuit faded, we collapsed beneath a fallen oak. My chest heaved. Blood trickled down my arm from a graze. The forest smelled of gunpowder and wet earth. I pressed Maisie's head to my shoulder and listened for the hounds. Nothing. Only rain beginning again. By morning, we found the others. Isaac had a wound in his thigh, Cora a bruise across her face. Samuel was gone. We buried what was left of his walking stick near the stream. No words, no songs, just a mound of leaves. "He's still facing north," Cora said softly. I nodded, unable to speak. That day, the sky cleared, and for the first time in weeks, sunlight touched our clean faces. It felt wrong to see beauty after so much ruin, yet it also felt like forgiveness. We followed the stream until it widened into a small valley. There, hidden among birch trees, stood a white farmhouse with smoke curling from its chimney, a red barn beside it. The sign on the fence read, "Holloway, Samuel's Quakers." An old man opened the door before we could knock. His eyes took in our torn clothes, our wounds, our silence. "You're safe here," he said simply. No questions, just mercy. Inside, the house smelled of bread and soap. A woman, his wife, brought blankets, water, salve for our sores. When she touched my back, I flinched. "Child," she whispered, "you've carried the cross long enough." We stayed 3 days. On the 4th, riders came down the distant road, city soldiers. The Holloways hid us in the cellar beneath floorboards, covering the seam with a rug. Through the cracks I saw boots, heard voices. "Governor's orders," one said. "We're looking for runaways." "You'll find none here," the old man replied. "Only farmers." His calm never wavered. After a few tense minutes, the soldiers left. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house was quiet except for the ticking of a clock. I went to the window and looked south. The horizon glowed faintly orange even now, Street Valenne still smoldering. I thought of the Baroness wandering through her ruin, of the governor writing reports to Europe, of the stories people would tell. Somewhere in those stories I was already half myth. Maybe that was how freedom began, not with truth, but with legend strong enough to outlive the lie. When dawn broke, we thanked the Holloways and prepared to move again. North still waited. Behind us, the bells of Street Valenne rang once more, faint, distant, uncertain. Panic had given way to mourning, mourning to rumor, rumor to silence. The city was learning what every master must one day learn. Fear is a fire that burns both ways. The road beyond the Holloway's farm felt like another country. The air was colder, the light paler, as if the world itself had washed clean after so much burning. For the first time, I could walk without hearing the whip of the Baroness's voice behind me. Each step north was an argument against everything she had ever said I was. But freedom, when it first arrives, is not joy, it is confusion. The mind doesn't know how to breathe air it never thought it would taste. My feet ached. My back split open again where the wounds hadn't healed. I told myself pain was proof. I was still alive. The Holloways had given us food, bread wrapped in cloth, a little cheese, 2 apples each. Simple kindness, but it felt holy. Keep west when you see the tall pines, the old man had said. Follow the sound of water. There'll be friends who know where to take you next. I had wanted to thank him properly, but words failed me. So I simply said, I'll remember your names. He smiled. That's enough. We left before sunrise. 6 of us now. Cora, Maisie, Isaac, Pearl, a quiet boy named Jonah we'd found along the way, and me. Samuel was gone, but his map lived in my head. North, always north. The stars were our compass. The wind carried whispers of frost. The days blurred together fields, forests, streams. At night we slept in barns or ditches, taking turns to watch. Sometimes we heard the distant echo of dogs, and our hearts froze, but the hunters were fading. Street. Valenne had other fires to put out rebellions, shortages, the fear that their world was slipping away. The Baroness still sent men after me, I was sure of it, but her reach had shortened. You can command wealth. You cannot command rumor once it turns on you. We learned from travelers that she had been stripped of her council seat. The governor blamed her for negligence, saying she failed to control her estate. Her allies abandoned her, afraid of the curse my name had become. One report claimed she had gone mad, locking herself in the charred remains of her house, writing letters to her dead husband. I didn't believe she was mad. I believed she was planning. Women like her don't shatter. They sharpen. The further north we walked, the stranger freedom looked. In some towns, white faces glared as we passed. In others, people offered water and bread without a word. The line between cruelty and mercy was thin as thread. One night we found shelter in a church whose minister had secretly aided runaways for years. He read us a passage about deliverance. The Lord heard their cry, he said, but when he looked at my back, he wept. I told him not to. Tears don't mend skin, I said. Help me keep moving. He nodded and gave us boots. On the 10th night, we reached the border of the next province. The land changed, fewer plantations, more hills, the faint smell of pine and snow. We followed a cart path until we reached a small hamlet by a river. There, for the first time, I saw people who were free and dark-skinned like me. They stared at us with cautious welcome. A woman named Ruth offered us soup. We heard about Street Valenne, she said. Heard a woman burned the devil out of it. I said nothing, but Cora touched my hand under the table. They didn't know they were feeding the ghost of their own legend. That night, Ruth's husband showed us a newspaper printed in the city. Across the front page, the Deveraux catastrophe Baroness accuses slave sorcery. Beneath it, a crude drawing of me, wild hair, eyes aflame, chains broken in each hand. I stared at it for a long time. The picture looked nothing like me, yet it captured what the world wanted to see. I had become symbol instead of flesh. Ruth's husband laughed softly. They think fear will stop the fires, but fear's the spark itself. He was right. A week later we heard that uprisings had begun on other estates. Not great armies, just small axe fields, left uncut. Tools broken, masters poisoned in their sleep. My story had traveled faster than the soldiers could. It wasn't rebellion yet. It was reckoning. We stayed 2 nights with Ruth's family. When we left, she pressed a folded piece of paper into my hand. For when you reach the next station, she said, it'll tell them you come from us. I didn't open it then. I didn't need to read words to know their weight. The road turned steep after that, winding through ridges where fog hung like cloth. We were climbing toward a world none of us had seen. Snow began to fall, thin flakes that melted on our skin. Maisie laughed when the first touched her cheek. "Heaven's dandruff," she said, and even I smiled. For a moment we were children again, untouched by chains. But freedom is never only forward. On the third night in the mountains, we met two men coming down the road, hunters by their coats, rifles slung easy. Their faces tightened when they saw us. "Travelin' late," one said. "Where you bound?" "To the mill up north." I lied quickly. "We work there." The man's gaze lingered on my scars. "That so?" His companion nudged him. "Leave 'em. You heard the stories. That woman sets fire with her eyes." They spat into the snow and walked on. We didn't breathe until they vanished. Later, around the small fire we dared to light, Maisie asked, "Do you think they knew it was you?" "Maybe," I said. "Maybe that's what saved us." Fear had become my cloak. By the 12th day, our food was gone. We reached a wide valley where the river curved like silver under the moon. There we built a shelter of branches. My fever returned. I could barely stand. Cora crushed herbs into a paste and pressed them to my back. "You'll heal," she whispered. "You have to." That night I dreamed of the Baroness. In the dream she was dressed in mourning black, her skin pale as salt. She stood before a mirror that reflected not her face but mine. She whispered, "You are my shadow." I woke screaming. Cora held me until dawn. We moved again when the snow thickened, our footprints vanishing as soon as they formed. The silence was strange, no birds, no dogs, no bells, only wind. Freedom sounded like nothing at all. At sunset we reached a ridge where the land opened wide to the north. Far below, the lights of another town glimmered. Somewhere beyond those lights lay Canada, the word whispered in every secret prayer of the enslaved. Cora gripped my arm. "Almost there." I nodded, but my thoughts were already behind me back in street. Valenne, back in the ruins. I pictured the Baroness standing amid the ashes of her fortune. Maybe she was still alive, pacing the remnants of her garden where the roses had burned to thorns. Maybe she still cursed my name. It didn't matter. For every curse she spoke, another woman somewhere would whisper my name as hope. That was my reckoning, and hers. The fire had equalized us at last. She had built her power on bodies. I had built my freedom on flame. Neither of us could undo what the other had made. When darkness settled, I finally opened Ruth's letter. Inside was only a single sentence, written in a steady hand. "What you survived will light the way for others." I folded it and pressed it against my chest. For the first time, the weight of all I'd done didn't crush me. It steadied me. The world ahead was still cruel, still uncertain, but it was mine to walk. And if the Baroness still breathed somewhere in that sea of smoke, then she too would know her morning of reckoning had come and would never end. They say, a house remembers. Even when its walls have turned to dust, the ground beneath it hums with what it once contained. Years later, when I first heard the stories travelers told about the hill above street, Valenne, I knew the earth was still speaking of me. The locals called it the Cinder Rise. They said no grass grew there, only blackened soil and twisted iron. On stormy nights, light flickered where the old mansion had stood, though no lantern burned. Children whispered that a woman in torn linen walked among the ruins, her hair long and wet with rain, her eyes bright as coals. Some swore she was the Baroness, searching for the soul she lost. Others said she was the slave who had set her free by fire. They never agreed which story frightened them more. By then, I lived far to the north. The snow no longer shocked me. I had learned to love its silence. In the small settlement where we finally stopped, the people called it Haven Ridge, though it was nothing more than a scatter of cabins and smoke rising from tin chimneys. Here the air tasted clean. Here no one called anyone property. We built our lives out of scraps of faith and the need to keep going. I found work as a seamstress again. It felt strange at first, touching fabric that wasn't for the Baroness, threading a needle, without fear of her voice behind me. My fingers were stiff from scars, but they remembered. Each stitch was an act of defiance, a quiet, endless mending of the world. Cora kept a small garden, even in the cold. "Something must always grow," she said. Maisie helped her, her laughter brighter now, though sometimes she still woke screaming. Isaac married Pearl the following spring. Their wedding was simple, under a sky that couldn't decide between rain and sunlight. When the preacher said, "Amen," we all cried. Freedom didn't erase pain, but it made room for joy beside it. Yet even surrounded by peace, the past had a way of knocking. Letters arrived from the south, carried by traders who followed the river routes. Some brought news of uprisings that had spread across the colonies. Some carried darker stories: mass arrests, hangings, plantations turned to prisons. But in every account, Valenne was mentioned first, as the spark. My name still rode on the wind. Adira, the burning woman, the ghost of the hill. At first I hated it. I wanted to be forgotten, to live as a woman, not a myth. But when I saw the fugitives who began arriving tired, starved, eyes wide with that same blend of fear and faith I'd once carried, I realized legends were doors. They opened paths when no map existed. People needed to believe someone had broken through before them. So I let the legend breathe. We turned our settlement into a refuge. The Holloways sent more travelers our way. We built extra rooms, dug root cellars, stored food. I taught the children letters at night, tracing words into the dirt by lamplight. When they asked about my scars, I told them the truth, that a woman once tried to bury me in fire and learned the flame could choose its own master. Years passed. The war came, the one they now call civil, though nothing about it was. I was too old to run, too tired to fear. When word reached us that the government had outlawed slavery across the entire land, the church bells rang for 3 days straight. People danced in the snow, singing songs older than memory. But freedom written on paper is not the same as freedom in flesh. I knew that. Still, I cried with them. I cried for everyone who had not lived to see it. One winter evening, a traveler arrived at our door. He wore a soldier's coat, but carried no weapon. "Are you Adira?" he asked. His voice trembled, not from cold, but from awe. I nodded. He reached into his satchel and handed me a folded letter sealed with cracked wax. "Found this in the archives of Street Valenne," he said. "Thought it might belong to you." The paper was brittle, the handwriting sharp and precise. It was hers, the Baroness's. "To whoever survives me," it began. "I have lived too long in the shadow of one act. They call her monster, saint, witch. They forget she was once mine." I read it twice before the words settled. She wrote of ruin and repentance, of nights spent walking the ashes of her estate. "I dream of her eyes," she confessed. "They burn even in my sleep. I built a world of obedience, and she shattered it with silence. If there is a God, he chose her, not me." The letter ended without signature, only a single line. "The hill remembers." I sat for a long time, the parchment trembling between my fingers. I felt no triumph, no vengeance, only an immense, quiet sorrow. Even monsters can recognize the fire they made. I buried the letter in the snow beside our home. The ground accepted it without ceremony. When spring came and the thaw revealed earth again, a patch of wildflowers had grown there, yellow, defiant. Cora called them sun ghosts. I called them forgiveness. In the years that followed, I wrote my own letters not to the Baroness, but to the ones who would come after me. I told them the truth of what happened on that night in 1843. Not the legend, not the sermon. The truth, that I was afraid, that I did not mean to start a fire that would devour a city, that freedom costs more than anyone can pay. Yet we pay it anyway, because to live without it is worse. Historians came eventually. They asked questions, wrote in their notebooks, stared at my back when they thought I couldn't see. "How did you survive?" one asked. I said, "By not asking permission." Another asked if I forgave the Baroness. I said, "Forgiveness isn't for her. It's for the soil that had to hold us both." When I grew too weak to work, the younger ones cared for me. Maisie's daughter, born free, read to me at night from the books I could never have owned. My eyes dimmed, but my hearing sharpened. I listened to her voice and thought how strange it was to hear peace spoken in the same language that once ordered my pain. Sometimes, in the hush before sleep, I imagine myself back on that hill. The flames gone, the air cool, the stars above clear as truth. The Baroness stands beside me, not as enemy, but as memory. We watch the city below, rebuilt and busy, unaware of the bones under their feet. She looks at me and says, "They'll forget." I answer, "Only if they stop listening to the ground." The last winter I lived, I dreamed of home not as it was, but as it should have been, fields without chains, houses without masters. When I woke, snow was falling outside the window, silent and endless. I told Cora, "When I'm gone, don't mark my grave. Let the wind carry my name. I want to rest wherever the fire cooled." She promised. And when my time came, they buried me without stone or scripture, only a small cross of pine. The next spring, the grass grew greener there than anywhere else on the ridge. Travelers passing through sometimes say they see light on that spot at night, flickering softly like a lantern held by unseen hands. They call it the ghost of the hill, but I know it isn't haunting. It's remembering. The earth holds stories the way a mother holds breath before calling a child's name. And when the wind moves across that grass, I like to think it carries one truth above all others, that a woman once refused to stay silent, and the world, terrified and awed, learned what a single voice can burn away.